So it's my pleasure today to introduce Anna Bardone-Cohn. Just let me tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Bardone-Cohn graduated from Williams College and then received her PhD from the University of Wisconsin, and then did her clinical internship in she did her clinical internship in Pittsburgh, is that right? And then took a position on the faculty in the Department of Psychology at the University of Missouri, where she took a shine to the coach there, Coach Quinn Snyder from Duke, and she got really interested in the triangle. So she came back here. She wanted to get a job at Duke, but that's kind of hard. So she got a job at another local college. I'm not sure. Chapel Hill, is that how it's pronounced? Okay, well, I'm sure it's a fine school, and they probably have a basketball team too, maybe? Okay. I'm sure their parents are proud of them. Okay, so she's now at the University of Chapel Hill, and so let's give a big welcome to Dr. Anna Bardone.
So most of what Mike said was true, not all, but I did have one thing I thought once you mentioned the basketball team. My son, last year when he was in second grade, played with the UNC men's basketball team, and something that kind of went viral. I don't know if any of y'all saw that, but anyhow.
It's on YouTube?
It's on YouTube, and so, I don't know. Anyhow, it's there. All right, well, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate the invitation and getting to talk with you all today. So I do research on eating disorders and body image, and I look at a bunch of different things, and one of the things I'm interested in are social cultural factors, including media. And so I'm going to share some of the research I've been doing on that, my lab and myself have been doing. But first off, before we look at online media, let's look at some things from traditional media, meaning things like magazines. All right. Looking at those images, what do you notice?
Thin bodies.
Thin bodies, okay, great. And so thin in certain areas and maybe not so small in other areas, okay.
They're suggestive.
Okay, suggestive, some of them in particular, absolutely.
Yeah, they're biologically sexualized in terms of, design.
Yeah, there's kind of this, for something that's more than a sexualized, kind of an objectified. You're kind of focused on body as object. So absolutely, I agree with all of those sorts of things. Another thing that I'll toss in there is that they're not that different from each other, right? When you think about looking at women walking down the street, there's great variability. That's not what we see in traditional media. We see a very limited range. The image to the right, y'all may have seen it's got a little bit of press that this is clearly a photo-edited image, extremely so, but in reality, most images are photo-edited. So in reality, most of what you see in magazines isn't fully real. Maybe small things, might be big things, but it's kind of not what's really out there. So these images of thin women are called, can be referred to as the thin ideal media. And media does display almost uniformly unrealistically thin bodies. Now, certainly there's some people that are naturally inclined to be very slim, but what we see in the media is unattainable by the vast majority of women. There's been a lot of research that's looked at the impact of viewing the thin ideal from traditional media. And so these have been correlational studies, some have been experimental studies. And what they found is, certainly from the correlational work, after viewing, viewing thin ideal media is associated with negative affect, so feeling just generally worse mood, depressed, distressed. It's associated with body dissatisfaction, and it's associated with disordered eating. And when people have looked at this experimentally, so had women look at images of thin ideal media and then measured body satisfaction before and after, they felt worse about their bodies afterwards. And they've had more negative affect afterwards. And these are very consistent findings. But what about online media? So we see clearly kind of the images that we see in traditional media. What if we look at what's going on online in terms of images of women and messages? Okay, so thin ideal media online. My lab has been looking at how online media may be related to and possibly cause body dissatisfaction. And I want to say one thing about body dissatisfaction, because we're going to focus a lot on that as well as on some other things. It's a problem in and of itself, But we also know it is one of the strongest risk factors for actual eating disorders. So anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa. Sadly, in Western cultures, some level of body dissatisfaction is pretty common among women. Often people call it the normative discontent. But when you get at the high level, that's especially an important factor predicting very serious eating disorders. And so in particular, what we've examined is pro-anorexia websites and social networking sites like Facebook. So what I'm going to go through with you all is 3 different studies that we've done that have looked at some of these aspects. Okay, how many people here have heard of pro-anorexia websites? If you raise your hand. Okay, it's smattering, not a lot. How many people have actually seen one? About the same. Okay, all right. Okay, so here's the deal. Pro-anorexia websites are websites that really provide support and encouragement toward the pursuit of extreme thinness. And I'm going to give you some examples and kind of show you what we did with this. But that's kind of a good overall way of thinking about this. Some websites go so far as to talk about anorexia as a lifestyle choice and not as a disorder. So really saying this is not something that's pathological. This is not something that needs to be treated. This is our choice, okay, the way of living, which certainly myself as a clinical psychologist, disagree with. I got interested in this for several reasons, but one is that I had a client I was seeing who was recovered from anorexia, but she talked about sometimes visiting these sites. And she said, you know what, I feel like I don't get judged there. So her felt like a safe haven, these pro-anorexia websites. So she didn't feel judged, she felt she could connect with similar others. So those were a lot of positives for her. And in my head I was thinking, I believe that. I can understand how you don't feel judged, but I also think this is just keeping you in the eating disorder thinking. This is just keeping you entrenched, even though at the same time you're trying to recover. So visitors to people with eating disorders with pro-ana might say, it feels like a place I don't get judged. But clinicians are saying they're dangerous. They can provide ways to develop an eating disorder. They can keep individuals entrenched in eating disorder behaviors and thoughts. And the Academy for Eating Disorders, which is the big eating disorder institution or professional organization, they actually wrote a position statement, I can't remember when it was, 2005 or something like that, saying we think this is a problem, but there was no data. There were no data saying, if you actually do look at these sites, there are reason to believe that there's some problems. So we kind of all felt those problematic, but there had been no data on that. So that's what my grad student Camila Cass and I set out to do. And this first study that we're going to talk about was something done at Missouri, and Camila Cass, who was my grad student at the time, she and I worked on that. All right, here's some common elements of websites, pro-ana websites, and then I'm going to show you some examples. I'll call them pro-anorexia or pro-ana. Sometimes they're referred to as pro-mia, like pro-bulimia, but often the pro-ana kind of encompasses aspects of pro-bulimia. For those of you who aren't clear about this, anorexia really focuses a lot on restriction and very, very low weights. Although people with anorexia can binge and purge as part of that. And for bulimia, the focus there is this repeated pattern of binge eating, so eating lots of food, loss of control, and then trying to undo the binge, most often with vomiting. All right, so here's some common elements. There's a disclaimer. So there's on the cover page, it says things like, warning, some of these images might be triggering. So if you're trying to recover, you see some of these images, you might kind of revert back to some eating disorder behaviors. They often tell people, get out of the site if you don't have an eating disorder, or if you're going to complain about this, just leave, don't bother us. That's also often where they talk about the lifestyle choice. There's the Anna Creed and the 10 Commandments, and these are just kind of lists of statements and beliefs that are very commonly seen on every pro-ana website. Tips and tricks, so these are ideas for how to maybe engage in eating disorder behavior, ways to purge better, or there are ways to hide your eating disorder. So what can you do so that your eating disorder can remain intact and people won't find out and won't bug you about it? There are thinspirations, and those are photo galleries of very, very thin women, most typically. Quotations meant to inspire. The thinspirations, by the way, that's why they gave it the name. The idea is these are things to inspire you. This is what you should be motivated toward. And then there are forums or chat rooms, and those, I think all these elements are pretty disturbing, but the chat rooms, I've seen back and forth, like for example, someone posts, I just ate 3 saltine crackers, and that's all I ate today. And someone might respond, you are so good. I'm so jealous. I wish I could do that. Or, keep going. You're doing great. People also might join group fasts as part of this. So that's what we're talking about. That kind of characterizes these websites. let's take a look at some of the things. You can't read some, but to give you a little bit of a sense of this, you'll be able to read some of the other slides. This is one pro-anorexia website. This is sort of the welcome and disclaimer page. So it's like, warning about these sorts of things. We are not promoting eating disorders. Rather, we're encouraging those who are already Anna or Mia and whose ultimate goal is to be thin. Okay. This is a page from another one, and this is kind of just a bunch of maybe kind of quotations, but maybe just kind of verbal inspirations. You don't need food. Okay, so there's that. Starving is an example of excellent willpower. Okay. So they have a variety of things like that. Let's look at those a bit more. Okay. And then this, again, can't see very well, but this is techniques. So these are things like drink lots of water, it fills you up fast and is good for clearing your body of toxins and hydrating your skin. Chew ice cubes if you feel hungry. Most people just want the taste of food, so chew the food you want and spit it out. Don't swallow the food. Okay, so these are the sort of messages that might be out there. They don't have them here, but other ones would talk about, again, like I said, hiding the eating disorder. One that I remember somehow was very striking to me was when you eat at a meal, use an opaque glass so that when you put food in your mouth, then put the glass to your mouth, spit the food back out into the glass, put the glass down, people think you're eating, you're not. Okay, so these are the sort of things that you might get here. I should have said from the beginning, I'm happy to answer questions along the way, clarity or otherwise, and I'll try to stop at some point. Any questions at this point? Yeah.
Are you going to get to who actually does these sites? Who does,
Yes.
the actual thin people?
Yes, no, good question. The people who typically develop these sites, often, not always, but are people with eating disorders and pathology. They're often girls and women, and those are also the people that most often visited. I think some researchers found that kind of ages 13 to 25 is where you see most of the visitors going here. Yeah. Okay, so our goal here with this study is to examine the effect of pro-anorexia websites on young women. And we think this is important given that it's really actually pretty easy to access these sites. At different times, people have tried to get them kicked off of different search engines, but they keep coming back. And the negative impact of other forms, and it's also important, given that we know that other forms of thin ideal media are problematic. Since this, by the way, there's still all these pro-anorexia websites, certainly, but also you see them take different versions, so they're like blogs and there's Facebook pages, but the theme is very much the same. So our question here was, did viewing a pro-anorexia website negatively influence body perception, mood, cognitions, and behaviors of young women? All right, so here's what we studied. Again, this was back when I was at Missouri, so we had worked with undergraduate women there, 235 women, mainly Caucasian, and body mass index was right in the middle, basically, of about considered healthy weight. Here's what they did. So they took a set of questionnaires. Okay, first thing they did after getting consented. Then they got exposed to a website, and I'll walk this through a little bit, and we'll show you some images of the website we created. We developed a prototype of the pro-anorexia website. We couldn't use an actual pro-anorexia website because content changes, and we wanted to have everyone see the same thing. This prototype was based on looking at over 300 pro-anorexia websites and us distilling the key components and looking at content analyses that other people had done. And so really we tried to capture the key aspects. When we did have our website, we piloted it and we had people look at actual pro-anorexia websites and ours and got very positive feedback that ours looked like the ones that were out there. We did not want to put this online. We were doing the study because we thought bad things would come of viewing this, and so we didn't want to have that online for everyone to access. So we, controlled it in a different way. Okay, so we developed this pro-anorexia website. So then we randomly assigned people that either saw the pro-anorexia website or we wanted to look at two comparison websites. The first one is the female fashion website, and we were interested in, let's create a website that still has the focus on the female body, but doesn't send the same messages. Okay, so it's not thin, it's not diet, that sort of thing. So it was this female fashion one mainly with average weight women primarily. And then another comparison one had nothing to do with appearance, home decor. And I'll show you a little bit about that. Okay. And they were asked to look at this for 25 minutes and to kind of go through all the different aspects. And then they took questionnaires after the website exposure. So thinking about the process of doing this and exposing people to pro-anorexia website, those of you who, done research methods and stuff, what do you think we should do at the very end of the study? Any thoughts on that? You've just exposed someone to this possibly very troubling website.
Like a debriefing?
Absolutely. Okay. So we had to do a very thorough debriefing afterwards, especially for the individuals who saw the Purana website. So really talked about the health consequences, really tried to kind of debunk some of the myths that we felt or why we thought this was concerning. So that was a very important part. When I talk about the study, some people say the IRB let you do this. They did. But we really try to be very careful in these ways. All right, so this is what we looked at. We looked at body perception. So we asked them, where do you think you're at in terms of weight? Very overweight, average, underweight, or overweight. And the way we're going to look at it is just who feels they're overweight versus who doesn't. Okay, so that's the way we'll look at this here. Negative affect, that was assessed using the PANAS, commonly used measure for negative affect. We asked about state self-esteem, so how they're feeling right now, sort of as social people, like about their social abilities and relationships, and then also how are they feeling right now about their appearance. We asked after the website, to what degree did you think about appearance? While you're using the website, and to what degree did you compare your appearance? And then we asked this question, we couldn't actually get at behaviors, but we got at kind of what they thought they might do. Not as strong of an outcome, but I'll explain why in a bit. So how likely were you, the question was, how likely are you to engage in food restriction today or tomorrow compared to as if you had not seen the website? So to give them a sense, what's their expectation? Do you think something's going to change? And we asked that about food restriction, exercise, and thinking about weight. All right, so here's the Puranorexia website. And again, we developed this first as a prototype, and then we developed the others. So it's called Starving for Anna. And so there's a disclaimer, and you can see kind of some of the different options. These were kind of information about those specifically, tips and tricks, inspirations, quotes. This is the Anna Creed. Again, these we didn't create. This is just what you see on these, so we just put it here with some different images. Thin is beauty, therefore I must be thin and remain thin if I wish to be loved. So they're making all sorts of connections here too. Thin is beauty, thin is love. The reverse, food is enemy. Thanks. The Thin Commandments. Okay. What the scale says is the most important thing. If you aren't thin, you aren't attractive. So these are, again, this was not created by us. This is what we saw on the Puranorexia websites. Tips and tricks. Again, a bunch of different tips that people saw there. If you have hunger pains, curl up in a ball, take a nap. Never eat anything bigger than your fist. I don't know how that works because you can always cut it up. So I don't know how that works so well, but anyhow. Quotes. And one that is not at least visible here, but you may have heard of this one. It's often attributed to Kate Moss. I don't know if that's correct or not. But nothing tastes as good as thin. What is it? As thin feels, I think? As skinny feels as thin feels. Okay, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. Right. And then this is an example of a Thinspirations page. Okay, so a lot of just very thin model celebrities images. Okay, so that was the Purana site. And then we had a female fashion one and a home decor, and I'm just going to show you the top page of each of them, but you'll see the format looks the same. We made about the same number of images and text, so we tried to make it the same except for the content. So this is for the home decor. Notice there's fashion do's and don'ts instead of like 10 thin commandments. Job interview outfits, dressing for the seasons. There's home decor, so these are decor do's and don'ts. So again, we tried to parallel it. Home inspirations, home decor forums. All right. So actually, I'll just dive right here. So I'm just going to go show you the results. Let me kind of orient you to the slides here. The first few slides are going to look like this. On the x-axis is going to be the 3 different groups. So Puranorexia, female fashion, home decor. And then the bars are going to be the darker purple one is their scores before the website. And then this lighter blue is the score after the website. This is a significant difference. It doesn't look that big, but I think it's interesting for this reason. This was where do you feel you're at weight-wise before you see the website? And this is where afterwards. So I think the key thing to think about, look at here, these are kind of similar or lower. These are actually not significant differences. This is significant. What this means is that women came in, they reported on where they felt they were on that scale, and then after the website, on average, women felt they were heavier. Okay, so you can think of this, there are women here who came in maybe saying, I'm average weight. And then after they saw the website, when they had to rate themselves again, they said, I'm overweight. Okay, so there was a kind of change in the way of how they looked at themselves weight-wise. This is negative affect. Same thing, again, the main thing to look at here, this is pre, this is post. Only for those who saw the pro-anorexia website was there an increase in negative affect. So afterwards, they definitely felt more distressed, depressed, angry. It's interesting because this is the mix of things. So some people might just be really outraged at what they saw, right? And other people might be comparing and feel badly about themselves. So we weren't able to tease that apart here. This is social self-esteem. Again, the things to look at here, higher is better social self-esteem. So only the pro-anorexia group have a drop in social self-esteem. So after seeing the website, they didn't view themselves as positively as social beings in terms of social ability and such. These I called process variables. These are questions we asked after the pro-anorexia, after the websites, and we said, so did you do this stuff? To what degree? So the options here were not at all to think very much, but anyhow, higher means I did it more. So these graphs are organized a little differently. Here are the questions, and now the bars indicate the groups. So to what degree did you think about your appearance while viewing the website? And what we saw is that the pro-anorexia group was much more likely to say, yeah, I thought about it a lot, compared to the female fashion group, and definitely compared to the home decor. So viewing these particular images increases the salience of your appearance, or thinking about that. When asked how much did you compare yourself to the images while viewing the website, we did not include home decor there because we didn't care if they compared themselves to a futon. Did not matter. So just for these two, we did see that those who saw the pro-anorexia website were more likely to say, yeah, I compared myself to these images. Notice that they're comparing themselves to the more unrealistic images, versus the female fashion. And then the last set of results, this was this question about how likely is it that you're going to do these behaviors? There was no significant difference here. So even though there's a little bit of a bump for the pro-anorexia group, they didn't differ in how much they thought they were going to restrict their food. By the way, 3 basically means there's going to be no difference. 1 is I'm going to do this less, and 5 is I'm going to do this more. So what you see here is that on average, the pro-anorexia individuals thought they probably are more likely to exercise than if they'd not seen the pro-anorexia website. And then they also said they're more likely to think about their weight than if they'd not seen the pro-anorexia website. All right, so just a recap of that, and then talk about some future directions and segue to the next idea. Women who viewed the pro-anorexia website had a change in how they perceived their body. So on average, they thought they were heavier after viewing the website. They had more negative affect. Again, this is this kind of broad measure of distress. They had lower social self-esteem. They didn't feel as good about themselves as social beings. They thought about and compared their appearance more during the website viewing. And they reported they were more likely to exercise and think about weight than if they had not. Okay. No significant changes in appearance self-esteem, which was a little surprising, but or likelihood to restrict food. Okay, so to come with a conclusion. So viewing pro-anorexia website, this was the first empirical evidence saying, yes, it does have an immediate negative effect on young women. Effects were stronger than from viewing the female fashion website, and what that tells us is something about how the female image is depicted or discussed that matters. Okay, that we didn't have the same effects when this other picture that had lots of images of women, but they were average weight, and there was no talk about dieting. We start thinking about so how does this happen? What's the process that's going on here in terms of generating these negative effects? And one thing we think that we need to be thinking about is social comparison. So the degree that you are kind of looking at these images and comparing and saying how do I stand compared to what I'm seeing out there, that's going to generate a discrepancy. And that can generate negative affect, that could generate wanting to kind of do something behaviorally to change. So that's something that I'm going to keep talking about through the other talks. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go back a slide,
Yeah.
Other than the negative affect, one thing that is maybe thought of as positive is they are linking, appearance not with food intake, but with exercise. And if you go to the other side of the campus, everybody wants to figure out how to get children to exercise more and get rid of obesity.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a really great point, and it's interesting because I think the eating disorder and obesity literature they're starting to figure it out how to work well together, but before we've really been at kind of loggerheads, I think. One thing I would be interested in, we didn't ask this question, I would be interested to know what's your motivation for exercise. And because if the motivation is, I'm not doing it and I'm going to be healthier, it's good, but if the motivation is, let me get thinner, and you're not, then I would think, but that's a good point, that here it's hard to exactly know what that exercise finding means. That's a good point, yeah.
Can you say a little bit about the participants and how they were recruited?
Sure.
And when you did debrief them? I'm concerned about contagion.
Absolutely. So these were just recruited from introductory psychology, and they did this for course credit. And the study was presented to them as a study of perception of internet websites. Okay? I can't remember truthfully if we went beyond that in our little ad. So I could look back at that, but I don't remember that specifically. So that's how they were recruited. In terms of debriefing, we had a handout that we provided them. Our research assistants went through a lot of details about, again, kind of debunking some of these myths. Part of the handout, we gave them resources, so national and local kind of contact numbers, like our local clinics at the University of Missouri, but then also things like the website for the National Eating Disorders Association. Because we were concerned about this, so we did all of those efforts and we really tried to engage with them. So I feel positive about how it went, but those were the steps. Yeah. All right. Okay. Okay, so what do we do with this information? Okay, so we see there are some immediate negative effects, certainly the social self-esteem and perceived body and negative affect. And these are just some things I'll toss out there, and I'd love if people have some thoughts about any of these or others. I'll share my thoughts as well, but should pro-anorexia websites be banned? What might parents do with this information? How can this information be used in therapy? So thinking about kind of the take-home messages that there are these negative effects, and this is what they look like, at least immediate negative effects. Any thoughts on any of these?
That is dangerous water, because that's censorship, something that's like in a Western freedom of information kind of mindset versus the great firewall of China. Like, if you ban a website for being pro-Anna, shouldn't we ban violent pornographic sites? Shouldn't we ban sites that promote like dogfighting or so forth? Like, it just.
So freedom of speech is the core. They're talking about that. Okay. Other thoughts on the freedom of speech? I mean, I think, oh yeah, go ahead. Or something else, either.
Well, I agree that we should just go around censoring everything, but maybe we could make it so you could, or parents could restrict those kind of websites from children.
In the end, as I thought about this more, I kind of fell in with exactly what you guys are saying. I mean, I think freedom of speech, pretty important. As much as I really dislike these websites, I think that there could be some concerns, a slippery slope sort of thing. But I also think about how, especially who you would presume might be more vulnerable, which would be like young kids. And so, one recommendation for parents might be, is there a way to kind of block these sites to make sure, kind of this is standard advice, but have the computers, or I mean, this is hard with so much mobile technology now, but in a common place where you can kind of be a little more aware of online activity and have these discussions. Now, interesting, some countries have really worked at banning them, like France has tried to push some legislation. I don't know where that got to, but anyhow, I think freedom of speech is really important, and I think we have to maybe tackle it in other ways. Were you going to say something?
Like the warning label on like cigarettes and alcohol, like if when you click the link, there could be like some sort of page that pops up, like this is where you're going, like these are the side effects.
Yeah, oh, that's an interesting thought. I thought about that, right. So kind of have that sort of like appear and I mean, obviously people guys could click and move on, but at least there'd be something there, and some people that would catch them and maybe dissuade them, possibly. Okay. All right, other thoughts? And I think, the therapy piece I was just thinking about and talking with my client about how really kind of joining with her and understanding that she gets some comfort visiting these sites, but also talk about the negative effects that seem to occur and how if she wants to move toward recovery, this is probably not a place for her to keep going. Okay, some of the questions, what about long-term effects? These are immediate effects. They're ethical questions in terms of long-term effects. So we ethically didn't feel, and I'm sure the IRB wouldn't let us, that we could they finished their pro-anorexia websites, they did their questionnaires, and see you later. Okay, so to really look at long-term effects, it's going to be hard to do in an experimental condition because you really do need to debrief them knowing that there's some negative consequences. And then how about women and girls with eating disorders? So my guess that there we really would want to look at maintenance. So to what degree do viewing these images kind of keep them stuck in this sort of mentality? And then another question, what about less extreme online media? So media that many use every day, social networking sites like Facebook. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. Okay, so I'm trying to think. Okay, so you said this is very common. I don't need to tell you all this. How many people here are on Facebook? Not as many as others? Okay, all right. So I'm actually not on Facebook too, true confession, but my husband is. Most studies find that about 90% or more of college students are on Facebook. Research has shown that females are more likely to post photos. They're more likely to compare to online profiles. Some characteristics of college students' Facebook use. We know that it's less likely that you make new friends on Facebook than you just kind of connect to people you already know. So Facebook friends are most commonly people already known, often peers. This is not my word, it's the word in this article. People tend to lurk more than they post, so you're kind of checking things out more than you're posting. And students carefully choose which photos they're going to present, and they really want to put their best foot forward in general. So when you think about social networking sites, there are a lot of good that comes of it. There's an opportunity to maintain connections, to build social capital, but there's also opportunity for comparisons. And people have expressed concern about that regarding comparisons in appearance, comparisons in terms of professional success, comparison in terms of relationship status and all that sort of thing. We're going to focus on appearance. We do have some data on the other comparisons, so I'm excited to look at that as well, but for now we'll focus on appearance. All right, so we know that individuals tend to present their ideal selves on their social network site profiles. I say SNS because for this particular study we left it vague, but most people are responding regarding Facebook. So what this means though, if you guys think about those of you who have Facebook accounts, you're not going to slap any old photo up there of you, right? You're going to think, I look good here. This is the one I'm going to put up. So people are kind of presenting ideal selves with how they choose the photos. Sometimes there's some photo editing done. Could be minimal stuff like using filters, but could be other more extensive things. People untag photos that they don't think are very flattering of them. So what users of social networking sites are being exposed to and may compare with is this kind of best possible image of their peers. What I think is kind of interesting and part of what got us interested in this is that you might look at a model and you might be inspired, might want to get them, but that's not your peer, right? But if you look at your peers on Facebook, you might say, I should be able to look like that. Appearance-wise, weight-wise, shape-wise, that just might seem more attainable. But at the same time, I don't think when you guys are on Facebook, and maybe I'm wrong about this, you are aware like, oh, she just put her best photo up. She looks great, but that's her best photo, she may have photo edited this. Okay? So it's not salient that peers select the most flattering images or may photo edit. So we were interested in kind of relationships between comparison on social network sites and body image and disordered eating. The one other question I'll put out here is we were interested in who might be most susceptible to these hypothesized negative effects. So just like all of us can look at thin ideal media, and while on average studies show we'll feel more body dissatisfied, that doesn't happen to any one individual. So some people yes, some people no. So are there some people that are more susceptible? And this is just a quote I like specific to the internet. It's not just the internet, but what you do with it. So I'm arguing that social comparison is a behavioral engagement with the internet that could be problematic, as well as who and what kind of person you are. Those are kind of individual differences that determine effects. Okay, so it's not just internet bad, Facebook bad, it's more complex than that. The possible other factor we're going to look at here is perfectionistic self-presentation. So it's a type of perfectionism, and it refers to really feeling the need to appear as perfect to others. Or you can think of it differently, not display any imperfection. Okay? So we're thinking if someone is very perfectionistic in this way, gotta appear as perfect, they might view these Facebook pages and especially feel badly about their body. Okay, so I'm looking at these friends who look really good. I want to look really good. I don't think I look as good, and that could contribute to negative body image. All right, so our goal here is to examine patterns of comparison with pictures on social networking sites, and then look at how the comparison relates to body image and disordered eating. I think better laid out here are these next 3 points. So 1, to what degree do young college women compare themselves with pictures on social networking sites? What's the relation between comparing yourself with these pictures and body image and disordered eating? And do perfectionistic self-presentation tendencies moderate that relation between comparing yourself with social networking site pictures and, for example, body image? And by moderate, I mean basically, okay, so if there is a relationship between comparing yourself with images and body image, is it even stronger for those who are high in perfectionistic self-presentation? All right, so we'll go questions about this before we dive into the results. Okay. Oh, I forgot, not diving into the results. This is my lovely undergrad RA, Jamie, who was willing to share some Facebook images. So those of you probably all know, even if you're not on Facebook, kind of what this is set up. But you've got, it's a very image-based, right? But there's definitely text and updates. But here you've got tons of ways you can compare. You can compare that, oh, she's in a relationship with this guy. You can compare that it looks like she's got these really fun friends. You can compare that she looks attractive, sort of things. And then they've got other pictures. So, and she okayed me showing these. She blocked out names and she checked with her friends. But you know, there's an identity, there's a story that gets developed through Facebook, right? So life is good and have a boyfriend and look good and all those sorts of things. All right. So I cut to the chase too quickly. Sorry, I've got to tell you a little bit more about the study before I do the results. So this was a study that was done at UNC. So this is 425 female college students. They were recruited from introductory psychology. The only requirement was they need to say that they used some sort of social networking site daily. Okay. Mean age, 18 years, 9 months. 3/4 Caucasian. And they just took this online survey at home, and we presented it as a study of peers and body image. Okay, so that's what they were completing. These are the measures we looked at. This was our question. It was just a one-item question that asked about comparison. How much do you compare yourself to the pictures you see posted on the social networking sites you visit? 1 is never, 7 is always. So they just rated them that. We also asked about, there's a measure called the physical appearance comparison scale, because we were kind of interested in, is it comparing yourself to sort of Facebook stuff in particular, or is it just generally if you tend to compare on appearance that there's going to be, you know, a negative relationship? Our body satisfaction measure was how concerned you are about weight and shape, how dissatisfied. And then there's a measure called the EAT26 that captured our disordered eating attitudes and behaviors construct. And then we asked also about perfectionistic self-presentation. Okay, so here's the first question that we're looking at. Do women compare with images on social networking sites? So a few things to mention here. These are all percentiles. Is that first of all, it runs the whole gamut. So some people are saying never or almost never, okay? But some people are on the other extreme. And if you kind of cut it off here, often you get 43%. So that, for me, is a lot. So almost half of women are saying, that's something I do pretty often. I compare myself to the images I see on Facebook quite a bit. Okay? So they're doing this, they're comparing. Now let's look at, does how much they compare relate to body image? And these are just the different variables I have up here, but the study variables in red are the key ones for this question. So how much you compare to images, pictures on social networking site is very strongly related to weight shape concern. So the more you compare, the worse you feel about your body. Also related to kind of eating pathology. This especially captures more dieting type behaviors. So the more you compare with images, the more you're dieting as well. Now these are cross-sectional, so these are just associations at this point. We looked at those same relations, but we controlled for people's kind of broader tendencies to compare on appearance. And we found that the relationship with comparing with social networking site images was still strong and still significant. So there's something specific about comparing with social networking images that is associated with negative body image and disordered eating. All right. And so this here is just depicts one of the interactions. We got the same pattern with the other one. Let me kind of, again, walk us through this. In this case, this is for disordered eating. So higher scores on the y-axis means more eating pathology. The solid line is people who are frequently comparing. This is 1 standard deviation above the mean. They frequently compare with social network site pictures, and the dashed line is low on doing that. And the thing to note here is there's this correlation, right, between the more you compare with images on social network sites, the more disordered eating. But if you look at this, this particular bar here, this particular line rather, what really also matters, what you want to know is how is their perfectionistic self-presentation. So those who are comparing a lot on Facebook, but it's not really important to them to present as perfect, they've got pretty low levels of eating pathology. But if you are comparing yourself a lot and it is important for you to be perfect, to present as perfect, then you really have high levels of eating pathology. And so on the Eat26, the 20 cutoff is the cutoff for probable eating disorder. So those people are quite up there. Okay. I don't have a graph of this, but we see the same kind of pattern with weight shape concern. So again, those who are frequently comparing themselves on Facebook to images and are very perfectionistic in terms of wanting to appear perfect, they're the worst off. So again, just wrapping up here, comparison with pictures is common among college women. It's strongly related to negative body image and disordered eating, and these relations are still intact even after you control for kind of general tendencies to compare on appearance. And it looks like individuals who feel motivated to present as perfect, they may be especially vulnerable to the effects of comparison on social network sites on body image and disordered eating. Okay, so implications, future directions, clinical implications. We certainly, we don't want to dive full force into this until we know things are causal and stuff, but there's certainly interesting hints here. So targeting comparison making, I think, would be important, and certainly with cognitive behavioral therapy for eating disorders and when it's targeted toward body dissatisfaction, usually can include this aspect. So there you might want to, as a clinician, talk about, what kind of comparisons are made, what's the motivation. You might guide people to kind of monitor their tendencies to compare, and let's see, look, you're always comparing to people who are thinner than you. Maybe it doesn't, it makes a lot of sense that you're going to feel worse about yourself. And I'd say explicitly talk about social networking sites. You might want to decrease the need to present as perfect. That's not a great trait to have, not very helpful for people. Some future work, definitely want to look at this kind of longitudinally or experimentally to try to clarify temporal ordering. So the way I think about this often is that comparing on these sites, leads to negative body image, but the other direction absolutely can, be more relevant or certainly coexist. If you feel badly about your body, you might want to compare a lot to see, well, who can I look like? Who should be my inspiration? Okay. More diverse group of social network site users, race and ethnicity, age, broaden domains of comparison and effects. That's kind of a vague statement, but what I meant by that is, again, I'm interested in the other ways people compare on Facebook. So again, Facebook tends to present some sort of ideal life, and you might compare on, again, they got a job interview and I didn't, or they seem to be going to a lot of parties and I don't, and then kind of what effects that has on self-concept and then the last point that segues us into the last part of the talk is prevention efforts. Is there a way to buffer these, possible negative effects, of comparing with social network site images? So one thought that we had was maybe if before they went on Facebook, they were we really made clear for them that, people put their most flattering pictures up there. You don't usually think of this, but really when you're looking at Facebook, you're looking at often more idealized images. So that was a thought there. All right, so Facebook. Very common, we already talked about that. There's a lot of attention to self-presentation, and there's a whole literature in the mass communication field about using Facebook to kind of present a certain self. And Facebook, we've already talked about this a bit, is a space that promotes social comparison. And there was one study that looked at people, and I think it was women, who looked at more attractive versus less attractive profiles, felt worse about their body image after viewing the more attractive profiles. So using the traditional thin media example, people have tried prevention efforts focused around media literacy. And you may or may not have heard this term before, but one way of thinking about it is media literacy involves critically analyzing media images and messages, and it makes salient the unrealistic portrayal of women in the media. So for example, as part of media literacy, you would probably talk about how, these women they're on there because they're very thin to begin with. There's photo editing that goes on. If you're a model, if your job is kind of your body, you might be exercising so many hours in the day. And if you have a lot of money, then you might have cooks to cook very, food for you, then kind of limit what you eat and that sort of thing. And then, these are just a couple of examples of photo editing that you might see in the media. Some of them are more subtle, but certainly you see, I think, her waist is much slimmer on the right side. Here, there are various things, shading and such. Her nose is slimmer. So anyway, what they find, though, is that when you look at traditional thin media, so images and magazines and such, that a media literacy intervention does seem to buffer effects. So if prior to seeing these thin magazines, you are educated about how to really critically analyze the media, there's less negative body image afterwards. Okay. So the question is, can we apply that to Facebook viewing? Can we make salient the fact that individuals present their best selves on Facebook? And so that's maybe not an appropriate target of comparison, although it might seem so. It might seem like, oh, it's my peer, I should be able to kind of look like that. But that may not be kind of, again, really appropriate. And this is just an example of something that you might be able to do yourself, right? Instagram and others to kind of change shadings. Okay, so the goal here is to examine if a media literacy intervention would buffer the hypothesized negative effects of Facebook on body image, in particular for those viewing attractive Facebook friends. And I'll lay this out in just a little bit. So our thought was maybe you're going to get the highest level of body dissatisfaction for those who were guided to view attractive friends, Facebook friends, and did not get the media literacy intervention. So they didn't get the prep saying, like, look, people are only going to put flattering photos up there. All right, so these are participants. Here we brought in a sample of men, and so we're really excited to be able to look at men as well. They're very understudied in terms of eating disorders and body dissatisfaction, but there's some evidence that those are becoming more issues for men these days. So we're excited to be able to do that. Let's see, about 2/3 Caucasian in both cases, and they had to have an active Facebook account. This was an experiment we did. So this is kind of the flow chart of what we did. Got consent, they gave an online questionnaire. They were randomly assigned to either view media literacy intervention or control intervention, and I'll go over that in a second. Then they had to view Facebook for about 10 minutes, and they were either asked to view attractive Facebook friends or view Facebook as usual. So we didn't say view unattractive, we just said view it as usual. And then they had online questionnaires after that and a debriefing. Okay, I'm going to the measures. These are dependent variables before I elaborate again on the conditions. So we asked them, these were just single items that I were asked pre and post. How satisfied are you with your weight, with your shape, with your muscles? Okay. And then we also asked, how do you think you compare to your peers in terms of appearance? That was asked pre and post, and again with those options. Okay, so here we go. For the intervention, I'll show both of these. Basically, they came in, they were randomly assigned to, again, media or control. They were given an article to read. We said this was an article from the UVA Daily Cavalier, I can't remember what it's called. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. But so they read an article and then they viewed a video clip. After the article, the research assistant said, what were the main points of the article? So that was sort of a manipulation check to see, did they get the main point? Did they get what we were trying to communicate? And then the research assistant kind of said a little something about that. But basically, the media literacy one, the article talked about how photo editing sometimes occurs on Facebook and people put their best selves on there. The video had a photo editing demo. We actually used, people aware of the Dove Evolution? Some people know about that? Okay, a clip from there, and then there's a similar version for males. So we used that. And then there's also a little journalistic news report about the danger of comparing on Facebook. And for control, we still wanted to be about Facebook, but it had nothing to do with comparison, nothing to do with like photo editing. It just talked about how popular it was. There was some info graphics. Facebook instructions, again, they were on Facebook for 10 minutes, but they were randomly assigned either to say, we told them, write down the initials of 5 to 7 friends you and others consider very attractive that you will view. So that was pulling for upward social comparison. So they were going to be looking at people that they see as attractive. As usual was just this, view Facebook as you normally would, write down initials of the friends' profiles you viewed, because afterwards we asked them about the friends that they viewed. This manipulation worked in the sense that the 5 Facebook friends, well, we basically computed the attractiveness of the people that these folks viewed and the attractiveness of the people these folks viewed, and these were always higher for both men and women. So that worked. So this is just an example of it with article. UVA students put their best foot forward on Facebook, talking about photoshopping. This is a quote, I've seen my friends look through their photos, pick only the pictures that look the best, and even edit the photo before ever posting it on Facebook. I won't show you the video clip, but as I mentioned, it kind of shows some of this photo editing. This is the control article. So this is all about, how often I'm on Facebook all the time, or, my mom's on Facebook. So we just talked about kind of how widespread it was. For women and men, we were again randomly assigned, and we got about equal number of groups. So again, everyone was either in the media literacy or control group, or in viewing a Facebook of attractive friends, or as usual. Okay, so first some descriptive statistics. For women and men, they were on Facebook on average about 6 days a week. On each occasion, about 31 to 60 minutes. So there weren't gender differences in terms of how often they seemed to be engaging in our sample. But when we asked how often do you compare yourself to the pictures of the same-sex peers you see posted, we definitely see a difference here, which we expected from one other article that had appeared in the literature. So again, if we look at how many people said often or more, 44% of the women, but only 11% of the men said, yep, this is something I commonly do. I compare myself on Facebook. And then similar kind of thing about how often do you think about your appearance, much more common for women than men. Okay. All right, interactive tests. So here we're interested in, does the media literacy intervention buffer negative effects of Facebook, and including for people asked to view attractive people? Nada. Nothing, unfortunately, came of this. We did not find that this media literacy intervention did anything one way or another for women. We did an exploratory search looking at perfectionistic self-presentation as a moderator, maybe only for those people. Did this media literacy help? But nothing there. For men, we did find something. So for men, we found there was a marginally significant interaction between intervention and Facebook viewing for muscle satisfaction. Okay? Nothing else was significant. And then we did this exploratory look again with perfectionistic self-presentation, and it did moderate that. I'll show you the graph so we can kind of see what that looks like. So here, let's see, higher numbers mean more muscle satisfaction. Okay? And then control group, media literacy group, Facebook as usual, Facebook attractive. So the group that reported worse muscle satisfaction after Facebook was people who got the media literacy intervention and viewed the attractive images. Okay? I should say I've got some thoughts about this, but this is kind of hot off the presses, so I'd love to hear any ideas you have of kind of understanding this a little better. But let's look at the next one in a second. I think this for me cleared things up a little bit. Now we're going to bring perfectionistic self-presentation into the picture. Okay. This was the group, media literacy and Facebook attractive, that was lower on the last slide on muscle satisfaction. The people that are pulling them down and having lower body muscle satisfaction are those who are highly perfectionistic. It's very important for them to present as perfect. If you have a low perfectionistic self-presentation person who views the attractive images and sees the media literacy condition, that's not pulling down their muscle satisfaction. So one thought we had here, but again, afterwards I'd love to hear thoughts on this, is that, so if they're kind of told, well, people kind of put their best pictures forward and so on, and now they're looking at people that are generally seen as attractive, which if you think about it in our culture probably would mean, tall and muscular and, attractive face, things like that. Especially if you're high in perfection self-presentation, really, part of the thing is I think that just might trump things. Or they might kind of not buy this. They might say sort of like, well, sure, they might put their best pictures, but God, I hadn't noticed before. Now that I'm asked to look at this in this way, that person really is muscular, and I'm not as muscular as that. So we're really trying to sort this out a little bit. And one of my students thought that another thought is people might feel called out, like maybe I do some of these photo editing things, and now I'm looking at these attractive peers, and they look better than even my photo edited versions, and so, that makes me feel worse. So we'll have to sort through that. I know we just have about 6 more minutes, so I'm going to quickly go through this, because if I can, I'd like to show this last video clip, because I feel it's slightly inspiring. So college women and men use Facebook with a similar frequency, but what seems to be different is the experience of it. So women are comparing more than men. For men, again, is where we saw that effect, that there was somehow the men that were in the media literacy intervention and viewed attractive peers were the least satisfied with their muscles, but especially if they felt the need to present as perfect. Okay, I do want to say, you know, I would definitely need more work on this. We do have concerns that our Facebook exposure maybe wasn't, you know, intensive enough. It was 10 minutes. Maybe we need to gear them to looking at images in particular. We said look at images and post, but don't post anything. Our media literacy intervention may have needed to have been more tailored to Facebook and college students. The article was tailored to that, but the video was about kind of model photo editing, and we thought maybe that's not as good of a fit. And I think you always have to think about, can a media literacy intervention backfire? There is some evidence that when you put, you mentioned warning labels, I think. People have looked at putting warning labels on magazine ads saying like, this image has been digitally altered. Well, one study looked at 3 things. One, no warning label. One, the warning label that says the image has been digitally altered. And the other one saying these specific parts have been digitally altered. So they'll mention like the thighs and the waist. People who had the specific warning felt worse about their bodies. So, and the thought was maybe there that just further draws your attention to it and further focuses you on it when you wouldn't as much. That was kind of the thinking behind the folks, but you have to be very careful about this. You don't obviously want a good idea to go wrong. The thing I have here about Smith et al. Is just to mention, again, one of the reasons I think that clearly that the story isn't done yet is they looked across time and found that the more people use Facebook in what they call a maladaptive way, which includes comparing, that led to body dissatisfaction, which led to a month later increase in bulimic symptoms. I don't know if it was increase or predicted, but you know, there's other stuff going on suggesting that we need to keep looking at this. I already mentioned the broader domains piece, and I think we really want to look at other, you know, broaden the social media look. Pinterest is obviously totally image-driven. There's kind of thin inspirations there. There's Fitspo, right? Yeah, not good, but there's other things that you can really, you know, focus on appearance-wise. And more diverse samples. I mentioned this as well before, but I think, you know, these are mainly Caucasian samples. We know that all ages are on Facebook. People might compare different things at different ages, and so I think that needs to be looked at. So a take-home message is that much more needs to be understood, but our initial findings suggest that comparison is frequent, and it's associated with body dissatisfaction and disordered eating. Causality is less clear. What kind of moderators do we want to look at is less clear, although perfectionism clearly has some support here. And to close, this is just like a minute clip, but I also want to mention I'm not a total internet hater, even though I don't have Facebook and I'm talking about this stuff, that certainly the internet can be used for positive changes related to body image. The 17 reference is that a 14-year-old started kind of an online campaign to get 17 to stop photo editing, and that was successful, so that's exciting. And then the other thing is, I just think this is kind of a neat video, and I thought it'd be maybe good to close with, and happy to.
Younger, smaller, lighter, fuller, tighter, thinner, softer. It really works.
We'll stop there. All right, so I went right up to time, and I'm sorry about that, but
let's thank Dr. O'Connor.
Sure.